morning. I am very lucky today because I have with me Diederik and Guillermo from T&D Europe. Thank you very much for doing this with me, taking this discussion to the Enlit platform. My name is Florence. I am content director for the Enlit Europe program. So Diederik, you are the Secretary General of T&D Europe. And I think you have been blessed in your career because you were actually working in beautiful cities in Europe, Vienna, Strasbourg, and The Hague. So Diederik, how are you doing? And where are you actually today?
Thank you, Florence. Good morning. It's a pleasure being here. And today I'm in Brussels, warm Brussels at the time of this recording, stuck at home. But I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
Good. Guillermo, you are Vice President for Communications at T&D Europe, and you are also Senior Advisor to the President at Omasapal. So how are you doing, Guillermo? And where are you today?
Thank you, Flo. Well, I'm very well. I am in Bilbao. Today I'm in my office. I live in Bilbao. I am not so lucky as Diederik. I have not been living in those beautiful places. I have been living all my life here in Bilbao, but traveling a lot. So I have the chance not to live, but to visit all those cities that you mentioned.
Good. Well, so now we will talk about different topics, but essentially investments in the grid, planning and regulation, but also charging and EV, everything in the context of the energy transition. So I will jump in with my questions. The first one is, everyone agrees we need more investments to replace aging equipment to make sure that it all keeps running correctly and smoothly. But investments in the smartness of the network, digitalization, flexibility requires more investments. So do you think that in Europe currently there are enough planning in terms of investment?
Well, that's a very good question. I would say kind of the short answer to the question is that most people would agree that at the moment we don't see the level and scale of investments that are needed to make our energy grids ready for the future. So I think that's how we would see it, certainly in T&D Europe. When we look at kind of preparing ourselves for the future, this energy transition, Europe wanting to become climate neutral by 2050, we always say that there's three things that we need. We need policy, technology, and investments. So we believe that with policy, the clean energy package has been adopted. I think in Europe we have a very modern, up-to-date policy and regulatory framework, which is good. Of course, there's always things to be done in addition, but I think at a large extent we have that in place. Second, we need technology. Well, as the voice of Europe's grid technology providers, we are confident that the technology that is needed for the future grid is available. And of course, for those new challenges that we need to address, we're in a lucky position in Europe that we have a very strong industry and a very strong ecosystem to be able to develop new technologies and solutions if and when they are necessary. So I think those first two things are in place. The third thing, investments, that's where we don't see yet the level and scale that we need. And I think we would feel that there's a sense of urgency to speed up those investments. If I look, for example, at the European Commission, they did a big study about 2 years ago, and they look at the energy infrastructure, and they estimate that we would need around 60 to more than 100 billion euros of investments per year in the grid. Others, such as Electric, are echoing that. And so for the moment, we're not there. So I think we need to have a step change over the coming years to make that happen. And maybe just to add, because some people may wonder, why do we need the investments? Because after all, I mean, we've just gone through a COVID-19 pandemic crisis, which kind of put serious strains on the network. And the network operators and all the people involved have done a fantastic job in making that happen and keeping the lights on and allowing us to keep lights and computers on. However, the energy transition means that the system will change quite dramatically. We will need to bring in more renewables than we have today, which requires a completely different grid from what we have today. And also, we want to roll out electric mobility solutions. We come to talk about that later. Also, that will kind of put additional demands on the network. Perhaps not in the immediate short term in the next 1 or 2 years, but in the longer term, we need to kind of be ready to have that grid in place. So all in all, I think the investments are not yet there. Luckily, there's a lot of recognition that we need investments in the Green Deal, in the next generation EU proposal from the Commission. So we're positive that it's going into the right direction. And to help this along, and that's kind of like my closing remark, T&D Europe is developing, is finalizing a set of concrete measures that we think could be helpful in identifying concrete investments that will be needed and can be made on the grounds, because we need to move beyond the recognition that we need investments to actual projects that will prepare our future grid.
Let me add something, Diederik. In my opinion, decarbonization definitely means electrification of the economy. And electrification of the economy means that we will have new uses of electricity that are going to put an extra stress on the network. And on top of that, this electricity must come only from renewables, as you have said, and these renewables can be distributed in the distribution network. So that means another extra stress on the network. And there comes the needs of the investments, not only for the reinforcement of the network because of the electrification in general, but basically for the intelligence that we have to provide to the network to make it digital.
Thank you. I'll move on to the second question. So 2 elements I understand are critical. Of course, it's regulation and planning. But does regulation really capture the value of digital assets? So about planning, what is also the biggest challenge, according to you perhaps, what is the biggest challenge according to you when we look at long-term planning and network investments, and the biggest challenge? What would that be?
Well, I think planning is a key element in Europe's network, of course, because we have a very intricate system in Europe that is completely kind of changing due to new requirements. I think it all starts in the end with the need to clarify what are the functions of the network of the future. What do we expect this future grid to do? And that's, as I said before, is changing. We're changing from a very centralized system with some large machines producing electricity to a system which is much more decentralized. And is not only one way, it's not one directional, but also much more bi-directional. So we have a different system there. And digitalization, I think, is really one of the key elements of this future grids that needs to be integrated throughout to really seize the benefits of the technologies that we have available at the moment. In terms of what that means, there are, of course, some obstacles. One obstacle that you very often hear is that the DSOs, they say, like, well, we're a bit stuck with our regulatory system in terms that we are being rewarded for capital expenditure, but not so much about for operational expenditure. So again, there is probably some further work to be done, because in the end, we need to create the framework for the network operators to make the investment and be sure that they can recover their costs through the grid fees etc. So there needs to be some certainty there. When it comes to planning, I think there's an element where Europe could come in, is to provide this overview kind of. At the moment, we have, of course, for transmission, the TYNDP, the 10-year network development plans, which show the different projects are being planned and developed. But for the distribution level, we don't have such a thing. And in a system where the boundaries between DSOs and TSOs are merging or becoming less clear, it probably makes sense to start identifying, or at least listing, kind of what are all the investments across Europe that are being planned in the network, so that we can take a holistic approach and make sure that that we invest in the right places, and not just have a very kind of siloed view on just one particular part of the network. Because after all, we're talking about a system, whereas in the past maybe it was more kind of local networks that were important. But I think we'll find that what happens in one part of the network will more likely have an impact on the wider system as we move to a more and more integrated electricity network.
Yeah, let me add just a couple of ideas. Well, on one hand, the regulations must be adequate to the evolving digital technologies. As I mentioned before, we have to provide intelligence to the networks, and that means digital technologies, and regulations must be adequate to that. And regarding the long-term plans, I fully agree, Diederik, what you say. For distribution, this is a must. But to have long-term plans, we need to have the certainty on the regulation. So the regulation must be in place must last for a long time in order to have long-term plans. That on top of that, the long-term plans for distribution should be validated and mandatory executed. That is a critical point.
Thank you very much. Now the next question is about transport. So to help achieve the EU's emission targets, the transport sector has to address decarbonization, of course, and electrification is playing a major role here. The management of charging points becomes then crucial, as the increasing penetration of EV poses operational issues for the energy sector and challenges in terms of management of power at local level. So what are the impacts on the grids concretely, and is the grid actually able to cope with it all?
Well, let me start with, the reality today is that the electric vehicle has not been introduced widely in our lives. In my opinion, well, the market share, this is a fact, the market share is still very, very low. There are many reasons for that. Of course, one of them is the cost of the electric cars, that this is something that in my opinion, 3-4 years, it will be the same. But one of the main reasons for this low penetration of the electric vehicle, in my opinion, is the range anxiety. I mean, when you are driving your combustion car, you have a petrol station around the corner anywhere. When you are driving an electric car, depending on which use you make to the car, you can just charge it at home, but maybe that you're not able, you don't like to make a long travel because of this range anxiety. So in my opinion, one of the important things that we need to deploy in the European transport network is a good network of fast and ultra-fast charging in order to reduce this range anxiety that most of the users have. Domestic and slow charging infrastructure is needed. Of course, it's needed, but it's just the peak of the iceberg. Well, domestic even could be interesting for the, let's say, second part of the story, that is the vehicle to grid, that can be also developed and can be also used as a matter of flexibility. But fast and ultra-fast charging is a must. So we have to prepare the network to let's say, to integrate that infrastructure of fast and ultra-fast charging. And that needs investment. To prepare the network, we have to invest. Basically, two things. We have to reinforce the network, because more power means more energy, and more energy means reinforcement of the network in one hand. And on the other hand, exactly the same I said before, is the smartization, if the word exists, or let's say provide intelligence and to make the network digital. To tell you the truth, now we have a good chance with the revision of the directive of alternative fuels infrastructure. This is a good piece of legislation where we can, now that is under revision, is the consultation, starting the consultation for the revision, and is, in my opinion, a good opportunity that we have to influence and to let's say to provide a piece of legislation that will foster the development of good charging infrastructure in Europe.
Maybe if I may add on that, I mean, I think the electric vehicle rollout is actually going to, in my expectation at least personally, going to be an increasingly political and societal issue that we're going to have to deal with, and not just us as an industry, but I think even more the politicians and people that govern cities and regional communities, because I think there's a lot of people who believe that they would like to make a change in response to the climate change situation. I think they're prepared to swap their cars for an electric version. But then, of course, we need to be able to make sure that we can meet the expectations of those people. One of them is, let's say, the long range, but it's also very simple. I mean, at the moment, I mean, is it possible for me and all my neighbors in my street tomorrow to buy an electric vehicle and charge it and drive it whenever I want? I think the grid is not everywhere fully equipped to deal with that. And I think there is a certain risk in it, because I think there is a lot of goodwill now, a good momentum to make some changes. People are aware, people are willing to change. But of course, if it turns out that those people who are keen to change and then get as a response, oh, sorry, you can no longer buy an electric vehicle because your 2 or 3 neighbors have already done it, and so we're above the capacity of the network, I'm just inventing a situation, then you lose a lot of the people who would be front runners in making the transition from fossil fuels to clean electricity. And I think that will be a tremendous pity. So I think there is a societal need to look at how do we prepare the electricity grid so that it can cope with increased rollout of electric vehicles.
Thank you. So it's a matter of timing, and maybe we have not reached that timing yet. One step further from EVs, actually boats and cruise ships. So how about berth charging, and what's new in the harbors? I believe that there are already integrated marine wireless charging and automated mooring concepts, but how is it all regulated in Europe?
Well, this is an interesting issue. Well, it's not so popular as the electric vehicle because, of course, I mean, almost every city has a car, but not a boat, or not a big boat, or not a big ship. So it's not so popular. But well, the idea is very simple. I mean, when a big ship is in the harbor and is at berth, it's polluting. And you say, why? Well, it's very simple, because, I mean, to keep alive the ships, to keep alive all the electricity system of the ship, they need to have the auxiliary engines working, combustion engines, of course, working all the time that he's at berth. So that means that from the chimney, they're throwing not only CO2, but also pollutants. So that means NOx, SOx, and particles. And that is very, let's say, pollutant, and in fact, the ports are responsible of dozens of thousands of deaths in the world every year. But okay, let's go to what is the alternative. The alternative is very simple. I mean, when I take my car and I go to a camping, I don't have my engine working the whole day in order to provide electricity to my caravan or the device that I have. No, when I arrive there, I just switch off the engine and I connect electrically, and I have from the network, I have the power that I need to use. It's exactly the same. So it's just to have the proper device at birth that can, when the ship arrives, it can be connected and is getting the power from the network. Simple like that. And that technology exists. And that technology, and the good part of the story is that it's a European technology. Well, regarding the regulation, I mean, this is the important fact, because I mean, the current directive on alternative fuels infrastructure mention this technology, but it's very shy. It's not really pushing towards the electrification of the berths at all. And now again is a good chance with the let's say the revision of this directive. In my opinion, this revision should include first the means to allocate funds for the green ports on one hand. Second, in a way or other, we need either in the DAFI or in any other piece of legislation to remove the energy taxes for the shore-side electricity. Don't forget that the fuels, the marine fuels, are exempt from taxes. So the electricity should be, I mean, in a level playing field should have the same conditions. Third, the investment should be incentivized in a way or other by the member states. And then, in my opinion, I think that we should put milestones in terms of the number of shore-side connections by years that are, let's say, by years or by 5 years period that are installed in each one of our ports. This could be, in my opinion, the regulatory aspects that could really foster the development of the deployment of this technology. Sorry for the phone.
Yeah, I agree with what Guillermo has said, and I think it's an interesting aspect also for policymakers to look at, because I mean, very often the discussion about who can make changes when it comes to energy and climate, some sectors are being considered as very hard sectors because of whatever limitations. Shipping is one of those sectors which traditionally is being seen as being very difficult to take measures when it comes to climate action. But here, I mean, this is one small example, but with tremendous impact also for the people who work and live in the harbors, in the terms of improving the air quality of the environment. So I mean, we're not talking here, at least not yet, about container ships being electrified and being able to sail the seas of the world. No, it's really this part where they come to the port, and then as a decency, as a decent solution, they switch off their kind of diesel engines and kind of use clean, local, renewable energy. I think there is something very nice and tangible in it, and I know that in the shipping sector there are some front runners who really take this seriously. But I think, as Guillermo said, we need regulation to bring this message even more across, also to get those involved who are not yet there by themselves.
So maybe then, in terms of this directive, we are now in a good timing to try to explain
exactly
what Guillermo, Diederik, thank you very much for your time and for this lovely discussion around the grid evolution, I guess. And I hope we can have a real coffee sometime, maybe not that soon, but I'm sure we will at some point to continue this discussion. And I look forward to the different webinars that will happen with both of you. And we'll put some more information on that on our platform very soon. So thank you very much and have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you, Flo. Great pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye.